Pleasure to be here to reflect on my various memories in my association with AAEM. I began attending AAEM meetings in 1960. I didn't join the organization until about 1974 because I didn't think it would survive, and I thought it splintered some of the major organizations to which I was associated with as president. There were a few things that occurred during the presidency, but you have to keep in mind very few presidents actually can make a special dent in their year as president, because most of the things that occur at AAEM are an evolution and the work of the board. And it's the work of the board, and the president sort of supervises the board, but it's the board work that leads to issues, and there was a couple of issues that took place during my presidency, but I would hardly call them something that I accomplished as an individual. One was the establishment of the American Board of Electrodiagnostic Medicine. This was a many-year study proposition, and it finally came to fruition in my year during president, and Austin Sumner was appointed the chairman of the board of the new American Board of Electrodiagnostic Medicine, and it took off right from the start, and I was pleased that it occurred during my presidency. Second thing that occurred during my presidency, which I thought was significant for the organization, was that was the year where AAEM began to exert its influence in the International Federation of Clinical Neurophysiology. That organization was primarily dominated by a European clinical neurophysiologist, and in spite of the presence of Buchthal, it gave very little lip service to electrodiagnostic medicine. And it was that year, while I was president, at the international meeting in Sorrento, where we met with IFCN people, particularly under the able direction I had Bob Miller really take charge of that type of activity for us, and we made very nice inroads into IFCN. I think that still is, I understand, a little bit of a problem, but that was the first major effort in that direction. Now, me personally, with regard to AAEM, did engage in two activities of significance. One, I think is the most important, and that is the fact that we now have Muscle and Nerve as our official journal. This didn't happen overnight, and this didn't just occur out of the blue. It required a lot of investigation when, maybe about 5 or 6 years previous to that, the organization began to examine as to whether it should have its own journal. There were two questions. One is, do we have our own journal and get our own publisher, or do we see if we can link with the journal that's already ongoing and make significant inroads into that journal and truly have it become our own journal. Now, this required a committee I put together at the request of Dr. McLean, who was the president at the time these ideas first came out. And I was chairman of the committee. I put together 6 other people, and one of the first things we investigated was what might be the number of articles that might come out of our own membership or people who presented at AAEM meetings. So we researched back 3 years, starting with 1 year before the year we're working, since obviously the papers that were being presented that same year weren't yet ready for publication. So we went back 3 years, and we contacted every author that presented at AAEM meetings during those 3 years. And we also contacted every author that submitted an article for presentation which was rejected by the program committee. And the question we asked them was, did the material in your presentation or in your proposed presentation that was rejected ever come to publication? And we learned something very interesting. One is that about 50% of the articles that were presented came to publication. And surprisingly, 42% of those articles that were rejected also came to publication. It's pointed out to our program committees that maybe they ought to try a sort of different tacks to see whether they can really make intelligent judgments when articles are submitted for presentation at the meeting, so that we don't really end up rejecting quality material. And I'm just assuming that anything that came to publication was quality material. The net effect of that review said that if we went to our own journal ourselves, the most we could do was quarterly. And I brought this to the board, and in discussing it with them, we decided that a quarterly wouldn't be enough of a splash, and they asked the committee to more further investigate the concept of becoming part of a journal that's already in existence, to see if we can get enough benefit, perks, and whatever to achieve really instantly an identification with that journal. We investigated several of them and came down to two. One was Muscle and Nerve, which was previously thought about by the board, and the other was EMG and Clinical Neurophysiology, which is a journal that comes out of Belgium. The committee, my committee, was split 3 and 3, and at the board meeting, and I presented all this material, I said, well, let's see what we can do first with Muscle and Nerve, and getting what we really wanted, before we consider the Belgian journal, which, you know, is out of the country, and computer communications were really not fully developed at that time. An important meeting was held at the Helmsley Hotel in the publishing offices of John Wiley, myself, Austin Sumner, June Kimura, and Walter Bradley, the editor of the journal, who I think was a member of the association, but I'm not sure, and the publisher. We were aware really that Muscle and Nerve really wanted us. It appeared that the journal was maybe headed for extinction because their circulation was very low. So we felt we could really drive a pretty good bargain. And at the offices and at the meetings at the hotel and on follow-up meeting at an airport, we did achieve what I felt was really an excellent result. Namely, we were going to get a significant cut of the advertising. We would get and have significant involvement in the editorial board. That the journal would adopt as a goal that 50% of the articles would be devoted to subject matter of importance to those in electrodiagnostic medicine, and that was a hard bargain to drive, by the way, since most of the journal was rather microscopic, histologic, and basic science oriented, and wasn't really very clinical. Not that we had anything against basic science, but basic science had to be what we felt was associated with electrodiagnostic medicine. Well, we swung the deal. We didn't ask the membership for permission. We sort of then ended up presenting it to the membership. Many were unhappy about it because they knew the journal and they didn't see that there would be very much in there for them. However, over the years, this has become extremely successful. Not only have we had editorial board involvement, but the chief editor of the journal, the last two chief editors are both active members in AAEM, namely June Kimura first, and secondly, Michael Aminoff, who's currently the editor. Second issue, well, another issue that I got involved with, which is very interesting in the sense that in the early 80s, the instrument committee, which I was first the chairman and then was taken over by Jim Albers, thought that there should be better standards in electrodiagnostic equipment. There were 3 or 4 manufacturers at that time, and many more were getting into the business. So Jim Alvarez, I stayed on the committee as a representative of the American Academy of PM&R, put together an international committee. The committee consisted of members from any of the societies that had any remote interest in electrodiagnostic medicine or used its equipment for one reason or another, and all the manufacturers. And it was for over a period of 2 years with multiple meetings, we developed standards for all the components in electrodiagnostic equipment. The display, the stimulators, the needles, etc. And it ended up a document that was close to almost a half an inch thick, always titled as a draft. And we were getting ready to present it to the board of AAEM and all the other societies for their final approval. Cadwell, the new entry into electrodiagnostic equipment, came out with his first machine, which was a digital machine. And in all of our work in creating standards, we did not engage at all establishment of criteria for machines based on digital principles. So it sort of ended up killing the project. However, there was added value in the project nevertheless, because this was the first time that practitioners and manufacturers really met in settings where we began to understand each other and each other's problems, and I think that had an important benefit to AAEM and electrodiagnostic medicine at that time and also in the future. My other important involvement with AAEM is through its committee, that's ABEM, where I was secretary of the American Board, which was established during my presidency, subsequently for a period of 8 years, and I've just come off myself. And I was extremely pleased to see how well the board did run and how industrious everyone was in maintaining independence from AAEM per se, even though it's an associated committee, and carrying out its responsibilities. All in all, my professional life, you might say, has been highlighted for many years by my association with AAEM.